Have you ever wondered who were the absolute worst commanders in the German military during World War II? While some generals are remembered for their tactical and strategic brilliance, others left a legacy of blunders, poor decisions, and catastrophic failures. In today's video, we're diving deep into the battlefield to uncover the 5 worst German generals of World War II and the reasons behind their infamous reputations. So let's start with the first name on our list, Friedrich Paulus. Paulus was a German field marshal and is often remembered for his pivotal role in the Battle of Stalingrad. His military career, particularly his leadership during this battle, has been scrutinized and criticized. One of the clearest examples of Paulus's inadequacy as a commander was his strategic misjudgment during the Battle of Stalingrad. Paulus failed to appreciate the logistical and operational challenges of prolonged urban warfare. When Paulus launched the assault on Stalingrad in August 1942, he underestimated the Soviet resistance and the difficulty of fighting in a cityscape that nullified many of the Wehrmacht's traditional advantages. His inability to secure the Volga River and sever Soviet supply lines early on allowed the Soviets to fortify their positions and gather reinforcements. When the Soviets launched Operation Uranus in November 1942, encircling the German Sixth Army, Paulus hesitated to break out of the encirclement. Despite the urgings of some of his commanders and the evident risk of remaining in a trap, he awaited explicit orders from Hitler, who forbade any retreat. This delay proved catastrophic as the German Sixth Army became encircled. The psychological strain of prolonged conflict can severely impact a commander's effectiveness, and Paulus was no exception. Paulus was physically and mentally exhausted. His leadership suffered as he became increasingly fatalistic and passive, undermining the morale of his troops. On January 30th, Paulus informed Hitler that his troops were on the brink of collapse. In response, Hitler promoted Paulus to field marshal. In making this decision, Hitler remarked that no Prussian or German field marshal had ever surrendered, implying that Paulus should commit suicide. By suggesting this, Hitler made it clear that if Paulus were captured alive, it would tarnish the honor of Germany's military tradition. However, on the 31st of January 1943, Paulus surrendered to the Soviet forces, marking the first time in German history that a German field marshal had capitulated to the enemy. While some argue that his surrender was an act of pragmatism to save the remnants of his starving and freezing troops, it also highlighted his failure to either orchestrate an effective breakout or to resist until the last. This capitulation was not merely a military defeat, but a profound psychological blow to the German war effort, symbolizing the beginning of the Wehrmacht's steady retreat on the Eastern Front. Ernst Busch. Ernst Busch was a general and key commander in the Wehrmacht. Busch's performance during the invasion of the Soviet Union provides an early illustration of his shortcomings. Commanding the Sixth Army, Busch was part of the initial thrust into Soviet territory. However, as the campaign progressed, his rigid approach to command became evident. He strictly followed Hitler's orders, even when they proved strategically flawed. One of the most telling examples of Busch's shortcomings was his handling of the Demyansk pocket in early 1942. His forces were encircled by Soviet troops, and rather than attempting a breakout or a strategic withdrawal, Busch opted to hold the position as ordered by Hitler. This decision resulted in prolonged suffering and significant casualties for his men. Although the Germans eventually managed to resupply the pocket by air and partially relieve the encirclement, it exemplified Busch's obedience to orders at the expense of tactical flexibility and the welfare of his troops. In October 1943, Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, the commander of Army Group Center, was injured in an accident, and Busch was named as his replacement. Facing relentless attacks as the Red Army launched its winter campaign in late 1943, Busch found himself constantly at odds with the demands of high command. He often hesitated to act independently, frequently deferring to Hitler's orders without question. By mid-June, the 700,000 troops of Army Group Center were vastly outnumbered by the 2.5 million Soviet soldiers. On June 22, 1944, when the Soviet summer offensive operation commenced, Army Group Center's 34 divisions were quickly overpowered by nearly 120 Red Army divisions. Commanders urgently requested permission to retreat, but Busch denied these requests, insisting on maintaining their positions. Within 48 hours, the majority of his divisions were decimated. After suffering the loss of 250 to 300,000 men, equivalent to 25 full divisions, Busch was dismissed by Hitler on June 28. Field Marshal Walter Model replaced him and managed to halt the Soviet advance. After his dismissal, Busch plunged into a deep depression, feeling utterly betrayed despite his unwavering loyalty to Hitler's commands. Having gradually regained Hitler's favor, Busch was called back to service on March 20, 1945, to lead Army Group Northwest. Charged with the defense of the German coastline along the North Sea, Busch faced significant challenges, as he had limited resources and struggled to earn the respect of his men. Ultimately, Busch surrendered to Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery on May 4, 1945. Ferdinand Schörner. Ferdinand Schörner was a German field marshal and a controversial figure in military history. Despite his reputed tactical intelligence and steadfast loyalty to the Nazi regime, Schörner's command was marred by ruthlessness, a harsh disciplinary approach, and a series of strategic blunders that ultimately contributed to his negative legacy. Schörner's rise through the ranks was marked by his unwavering commitment to Nazi ideology and his brutal enforcement of discipline. This approach severely undermined the morale and effectiveness of his troops. He was infamous for his harsh measures, including the execution of soldiers accused of desertion or cowardice without proper trials. This created a climate of fear rather than one of respect and loyalty, crucial elements for maintaining a cohesive fighting force. The mistrust and low morale among his soldiers impaired their combat effectiveness, especially during the tough and demoralizing conditions on the Eastern Front. Strategically, Schörner's tenure was filled with questionable decisions that worsened Germany's deteriorating situation. His obsession with holding ground at all costs led to the unnecessary loss of thousands of soldiers. The most notorious example of this was his defense of the Courland pocket. Instead of authorizing a strategic withdrawal to save his encircled troops, Schörner chose to hold the position, leading to a prolonged and futile defense that drained valuable resources and manpower. This decision was symbolic of his rigid and inflexible thinking. Moreover, Schörner's relationship with his superiors and peers further highlights his inadequacies as a leader. His allegiance to Hitler, coupled with his disdain for colleagues who did not share his views, isolated him within the military hierarchy. This isolation not only stifled productive collaboration, but also led to a lack of critical feedback that could have informed better strategic decisions. Schörner's habit of reporting overly optimistic assessments to Hitler only fueled unrealistic expectations and poor strategic directives from the Nazi leadership. Additionally, Schörner's inability to inspire his troops or foster loyalty beyond fear further cemented his reputation as a bad commander. Schörner relied on punitive measures and intimidation, alienating his soldiers and diminishing their willingness to fight effectively. This was particularly bad during the latter stages of the war, when the German army needed resilient and motivated troops more than ever. Schörner's legacy was further tainted by his actions during the final days of the war. Schörner was accused of abandoning his troops to save himself, fleeing the battlefield as the Allies closed in. Hermann Göring. Hermann Göring was one of Adolf Hitler's closest associates. Despite his influential position and early achievements, his legacy as a military commander is marked by a series of disastrous decisions and strategic blunders that significantly contributed to the downfall of Nazi Germany. Göring's charisma, combined with his military background, earned him several key positions, including Minister of Aviation and most notably, Chief of the Luftwaffe. One of Göring's most significant failures as a military commander occurred during the Battle of Britain in 1940. Entrusted with the task of securing air superiority over Great Britain to pave the way for a potential invasion, Göring's Luftwaffe faced the Royal Air Force. Initially, the Luftwaffe's strategy focused on attacking RAF airfields and infrastructure, which was beginning to show results. However, Göring made the critical error of shifting the focus to bombing London and other cities in response to the RAF raids on Berlin. This decision, influenced by his desire for retribution, allowed the RAF to recover and regroup, ultimately resulting in the Luftwaffe's failure to gain air superiority. Göring's incompetence was further demonstrated during the invasion of the Soviet Union and the Battle of Stalingrad. As the war on the Eastern Front dragged on, German forces found themselves encircled at Stalingrad. Hitler, influenced by Göring's overly optimistic assurances, believed the Luftwaffe could supply the besieged 6th Army by air. Göring promised to deliver 300 tons of supplies daily, a figure that was not only unrealistic but also logistically impossible, given the harsh winter conditions and Soviet anti-aircraft defenses. In reality, the Luftwaffe was able to deliver less than a third of the required supplies, leading to the eventual surrender of the Sixth Army in February 1943. Beyond his battlefield blunders, Göring's tenure as a commander was plagued by corruption and inefficiency. The Luftwaffe, once a formidable force, suffered from poor maintenance, inadequate training, and a lack of innovation under Göring's leadership. His lavish lifestyle and detachment from the realities of the front lines further eroded his credibility and effectiveness as a commander. As the war progressed, Göring's influence faded. By the time of the Allied invasion of Normandy in 1944, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self, unable to mount any significant opposition to the advancing Allied forces. Göring's mismanagement and strategic incompetence had left the German Air Force depleted and demoralized. Wilhelm Keitel. As Chief of the Armed Forces High Command, Wilhelm Keitel's tenure was riddled with strategic blunders and an unwavering loyalty to Adolf Hitler, leading to disastrous outcomes for Germany. Keitel's career was characterized more by compliance than brilliance. Unlike effective military leaders, he lacked strategic intelligence and boldness. Instead of challenging Hitler's often flawed directives, Keitel acted as a compliant executor, even when orders defied military logic. This earned him the derisive nickname La Keitel, meaning lackey. One of Keitel's most notorious failures was his role in the invasion of the Soviet Union. Despite the logistical and strategic challenges posed by the Soviet Union's vastness and harsh climate, Keitel did not oppose Hitler's insistence on a rapid assault. His inability to advocate for a more measured approach led to the Wehrmacht's overstretch and catastrophic defeat in the Russian winter. When the Allied forces landed in Normandy in June 1944, Keitel failed to coordinate an effective counterattack. His obedience to Hitler's unrealistic orders prevented a flexible and timely response, aiding the Allies' advance into occupied Europe. This failure underscored his lack of independent judgment and strategic foresight. Moreover, Keitel's role in planning and executing war atrocities further stained his legacy. He signed orders facilitating war crimes, including the Commissar Order, which directed the execution of Soviet political officers. After the war, Keitel's lack of leadership and moral failings were exposed during the Nuremberg trials. Convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity, he was executed in 1946. Well, that's it. We hope you enjoyed our video. Which German general do you think had the most negative impact, and why? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below, and also remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more fascinating history content. Thanks for watching, and until next time.